Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. We are talking about death and what happens afterwards. So before the break, I shared about my uncle. Now, my uncle was an engineer, and he was someone who was very left brain and certainly has never read anything about Dr. Kubler-Ross or Dr. Mooney. And so he just was a normal guy who didn't spend time thinking about dying or death until he had a heart attack, and actually also had a near-death experience. Now, after he was resuscitated and came back, it took him a little bit to really get used to being back alive. He shared in secret with us that he had the strangest experience. And he shared exactly what I said before, this getting out of your body, looking down and moving towards the light. And there he was in a room where he saw that behind curtains, there were all these people that he felt he knew, people that had passed before him, but he couldn't see them. And he was asked the question, no, actually he wasn't asked the question. He was actually told that this was not his time. He wasn't even his choice. He just was told, you are not ready yet. This is not your time. And so he was sent back and came back. Now, what for him happened afterwards was similar to what happened to anyone else that had a near-death experience, which was there was no fear of the unknown anymore. There was a knowledge that something happens afterwards, something actually I know, another adventure begins. And when you really think about nature, I mean, there is always a cyclical way in nature, you know, with the breath, the seasons, the tides, day and night. There is always a cycle. And of course, life and death are a part of that cycle. And I just feel like sometimes we are hanging on so to whatever we think life is, just like a baby would hang on to the womb and we don't want to let go. But maybe we have to be also realizing that if we would have stayed in the womb, well, this would have not necessarily helped us to have a full experience of life. And maybe we also need to, at some point, be ready to let go of that life and let go of whatever we think we have to hold on to so that we can move on to that next adventure. And the actual dying is just this birth canal to go through. Sounds kind of, I don't know, comforting to see it this way. At least it was comforting for me. Now, there is another layer that I also found so fascinating. And that layer about death is, are we coming back? Is there actually a past life? And will there be future lives? Now, wouldn't that be great? Now, again, I am a physician, I'm a researcher, and I used to be very skeptical until I wasn't any longer. And for me, it was the work that I do with clients with past life regressions, but also the work that others did, like Dr. Brian Weiss, who again is a physician, a psychiatrist, and who did hypnotherapy with a woman who was really traumatized by her phobia of water, of drowning. And he did a regression, you know, in traditional regression, you just go back all the way, you know, to your birth. Well, somehow she went off and got further and all of a sudden was in a place where 4,000 years before the present time, she was facing herself being someone completely different, and she could describe exactly where she was, how she looked like, and that she actually died by a tidal wave in the water. It was a very intense session, apparently, and something that really was for the patient, this woman, Catherine, and Dr. Weiss, quite overwhelming. So he didn't really know what to make out of it. So he just, you know, asked her to come back in a few days and check on her. Well, every of her phobias that she was suffering with for years was gone. So he felt like there is something to it. This is not just something that, well, nice visual visualization or imagination, something very creative happened in the mind, and so it all poofed away. He thought there is something more to that. And so he did some research on past life regression and found fascinating things where people were able to talk languages that they have never learned, old English or even languages from other countries. They were talking about specific towns they remembered they lived in, even though they had never been before, and traveling to those towns. Yeah, they existed. Exactly, those houses existed. These places existed. Things that we don't really know how to explain. How come that those people were remembering something that was beyond the experiences of this life? Now, in Buddhist tradition, it's well known that the lamas, for example, reincarnate, if they choose to be of service again. And so there is, this tradition of the lama that is passing to, give some clues or some ideas on where to look for the new lama. And then there are some processes where this child that is the reincarnation of the new lama needs to, for example, find some objects that were in the possession of the old lama, or they needed to identify people that the old lama was associated with. And only then, when they were able to do that, then they were proven to be that reincarnation. And it's fascinating to see with these kids that sometimes come from very poor and simple families, are just able to, remember what they had done in the past life that they could have not learned about. So these kind of things are just, I think, fascinating evidence that there is the possibility of coming back in another life. And I personally had such an intense dream. Now, I had this one dream over and over again where I'm walking on an old cobble street, and there are these little, houses and taverns that I'm passing by, and it feels so familiar. And I feel like, oh yeah, I know this corner. Okay, when I go around there, I can see a little spring here and a little tree. And I have no idea where this was, but when I'm in this dream, I know exactly where I am. One day this dream went a little further, and I realized that I'm actually arriving at a house. And I saw myself, looking through my own eyes of the person in that dream, opening the door and entering into the house. And the house looked like, a house maybe from the 17th century. And it was beautiful. And then I stepped into a room, and there was a big mirror. And when I went in front of the mirror, I saw myself in the mirror. And who I was in that moment was a guy with a big belly and a long beard and dark hair and a red robe. And it really startled me because it felt so real. It felt like, well, this is who I am. And this is in that moment, maybe who I was, who I remember to be. And just such an interesting dream, again, was poking my curiosity to my own past lives and what they may have been about. Again, there is no proof because we cannot really prove anything about death. These may be all nice constructs of a mind that is incredibly creative, or this may be just the truth. See, the question is, why don't we remember our death? Why don't we remember really clearly that everything is fine? Don't worry about dying. You have another, go around if you choose to. I think we don't, because if we would, how quickly would we give up? How quickly would we say like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I have cancer. I don't want to go through chemo or surgery or something like this. Poof, go on, go to the next life, have a reboot, start all over again. I think we would just not really get the learnings and go maybe through those tougher times if we would not forget that there is something very comforting and positive waiting for us after this life. I think life is precious. I don't think it's necessarily always super fun. It can be hard. It can be an amazing learning experience. It's an exploration. And I think we are here ultimately to learn. And as the near-death experiences say, to give love, to experience love, to learn about love. So if the going gets tough and we would just always check out, I do believe we would skip a lot of what we're here to do and here to share with the world.